Welcome to the Tailoring Talk show with your host, Roberto Rivilla. I'm a bespoke tailor, menswear designer, and owner of Roberto Rivilla London Suit, Shirt, and Shoemakers. It's the podcast where you drop in for the threads, but often leave with something quite unexpected. We'll meet self-starters and creators to learn about their journeys, the highs and lows, and lessons they've learned along the way. Please support the show by subscribing, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it helps so much if you take a few seconds to rate and review my show. Today's guest helps humans unclutter their thoughts, clarify priorities, and create actionable plans that empower them to become the best version of themselves. He has had to endure the toughest series of adversities in his life: addiction, divorce, the loss of 2 children, but he uses his experiences in his mission to develop courageous humans that desire to live inspiring lives. He was awarded the 2017 Distinguished Leadership Award as a global influencer by iChange Nations, and is the author of the book Big, Bold, Brave: How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. Here to teach us how to eat fear for breakfast and become courageous humans, I'm so pleased to welcome Clint Hatton to the Tailoring Talk show. Clint, how are you?
I am awesome, Roberto. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. We've been working on it for what seems like about a year, which is a gross exaggeration, but it's been a while.
Well, you know, we're both busy, and then I had some things come up on the personal front, and you were so gracious. Thank you so much, because you were just the kindest when I had to unfortunately move things around at the last minute. But I'm really, really grateful that you went into my schedule and you rebooked. So, you know, we're all benefiting today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you again. I really, again, I can't hardly wait to get into this with you. So let's do it.
Exactly. So you are calling in from just outside of the Lone Star State?
Yeah, I'm actually in a city called McKinney, which is a suburb of Dallas, basically. We're a tiny little city of about 200,000 on our way to 360,000 with the growth that we're experiencing right now. So a little big town.
Yeah, McKinney sounds like a place that has been around since like the 1800s, I want to say, because I'm a huge Western fan, and it really sounds like at some point it might have been one of those kind of in-between places that outlaws kind of pass through. As you get to know me, you'll know my imagination goes absolutely crazy.
Your imagination is pretty spot on. That's really amazing. Yeah, the city is actually well over 100 years old. And the name itself, I'm in Collin County, which is one of the biggest, more affluent counties now in all of Texas, for that matter, but especially up here north. And the name came from a guy named Collin McKinney. And so the two names actually come from a historical figure who founded the town. And we actually, if you ever come here, dude, we're going to hook up. We're going to go have a great time. We have a historical downtown that people literally fly in just to come hang out. So you're right on.
Awesome. Okay, brilliant. I got my Texas. I was about to say Texas hookup. That can mean very different things in different places. Yeah. I have my friend in Texas.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, sorry, Clint. Welcome to the madhouse. So you have had quite the journey. I mean, let's do this. Actually, I'm gonna let you tell the story, but give our listeners a little kind of run through of kind of what you've been through to get to where you are sitting in front of us today.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. You know, I think I can quickly kind of run through my origin story, if we could say it that way. And it really does set up even where I am today, you know, because one of the things that I believe to be true about life is it really is a journey, you know, and it's a story that's constantly evolving, and one thing kind of plays into the next. And so it's definitely true with me. You know, I grew up in Los Angeles, sunny Southern California, and really had what I thought was a pretty normal life. And then by the time I was 12 years old was the first actual hit, if you will, where, you know, I experienced something that wasn't very pleasant. And it really evolved around my dad. My mom and dad had me very late. I actually was never supposed to exist. They thought that she would never have children again. My mom, she had a partial hysterectomy. and really wasn't supposed to have enough equipment, if you will, to have another
Yeah.
child. So my brother's 8 years older than me, but here I came along. And so by the time I was almost 12, they had been married well over 25 years already. So they'd been around a while. Dad had an affair. Ultimately, that set us as a family on about what ended up being a 2-year nightmare, where he moved out. He moved in with the woman that he had the affair with. She had a son that was a couple years older, which was very awkward for me. But where it got really tough was my mom didn't respond very well to what happened. They got married at 18 and 16. She was
Wow.
16. So, different generation. He fought in the Korean War. They kind of came out of that, got married very early, and it was normal. But what happened was, it was the only guy she knew. And so she ended up beginning to drink really heavy, ended up with suicidal ideation. And ultimately, what became really tough for me is, here I was 11 or 12 with just her in the house. My brother, who I just said was much older, he had moved several hundred miles away. So it was just me and her. And, I wasn't capable of helping her cope, but I was all she had. And so it didn't go well. And she tried committing suicide several times. And a couple of times almost took me with her, one in a speeding car and another time when she had a handgun that we had to wrestle away from her. And so it was, a scary time. And eventually they reconciled and came through that. And just to fast forward that part of the story, my parents ended up married for over 65 years by the time they both passed away about 8 years ago in their 80s. And we had a good relationship in my adult years. But that set a path for me of bad coping mechanisms. I started drinking, started taking pretty hard drugs, 13 years old, 12. Now I was an athlete. So it was the one thing that I felt like, I wouldn't say kept me grounded. That's probably a gross exaggeration, but it at least kept me with some sort of a focus that I didn't just go down this complete rabbit hole, lose myself in time. But ultimately, the abuse of drugs and alcohol continued. By the time I was 19, I was trying to pursue college football, ended up blowing out my knee for the second time. That ended. And so I actually was forced at 21 years old to make a decision. Okay, do I want to continue with my education? What do I want to do? Roberto, I wish I had a different answer back then. I really do. I wish it was about education at that time, but it wasn't. And so I became a professional salesperson. I got into the automotive sales industry. And that sounds like a positive term, but that's actually where I was introduced to meth. And so, for several years, for several years in the car business. And then I got out of the car business and into a different type of sales, but the meth continued. And so, I abused meth on and off for almost 9 years, along with, everything else, just drugs and alcohol. So what ended up happening for me, and this is where my path took a turn, and it's also very foundational to, I think, who I am today. The curious thing about that journey was, even in my darkest moments with doing drugs and being in seedy situations and things like that, I always wanted to help people. I always enjoyed helping people. And people would tell me anything. And I remember one vivid story. We were excuse me, I had some friends that ran the local nightclub that we all hung out with. And so it wasn't uncommon for us to shut that down at 2 a.m. and then go to someone's house. And because of the meth, we go sometimes a day or two, And so one night we're there and everybody leaves to go get more alcohol except this one girl who I just met, and she was married. Her husband left too. So it's just the two of us. And she starts telling me some of her deepest, darkest secrets. She had been raped as a young girl and went through just hell. And she even looks at me and she goes, I can't believe I'm telling you this. My husband doesn't even know any of this stuff, And that was not an uncommon occurrence for me. For whatever, people would just be free to talk to me about stuff, Now, the downside of that is clearly at that stage of my life, not a lot of wisdom, not a lot of ways to actually help people, but that desire was really in there, and it was birthed. So fast forward, by the time I'm 30, I'm in a marriage that's failing miserably, which you can imagine already. I've given you no reason to believe that I was a great husband, and I wasn't. And, she had her issues too. My ex-wife had a lot of hurts, a lot of pain. So we had, alcohol induced, sometimes violent situations. I mean, it was really ugly scene. And one day we did meth together, we decided we hadn't done it in a while. So it wasn't like I was doing it every day, but we decided to go do it one more time. And Roberta, it was one of those things where I woke up the next day, and your listeners out there who have either experienced meth or been around it, no, it's not like you wake up feeling great ever, right? But that particular day, I woke up, I felt like crap, and I just thought to myself, man, who are you? Is this really how you want to roll the rest of your life, And so for me, I just made a decision that morning. I'm done with meth. It's over. I'm never going back. It's not who I want to be. And so I stopped. And that's been over, 27, I'm probably closer to 30 years ago now. And it was over. But there was a couple other things going on during that time. And then I'm going to bounce it back to you so we can get into some good stuff here. But during that time, I had joined a network marketing company, direct sales, MLM, that kind of, and it was a nutritional company. As weird as this all sounds, even though I did so much stuff to damage my body, I also like to work out, and I also took nutritional supplements. So during that time, I got involved with this company, and we had these trainings and workshops, what I now call transformational coaching. And I just had never been around people that were teaching me principles about how I could improve myself, and that, I didn't have to be a product of my really bad decisions or even environment or pains of the past. And, that I could really do something great and I could really help people. And so all that stuff was happening around the same time. And then also for me, I don't know if you knew this, because I can't remember. I know you've researched me as well as you could, but I was a pastor for 17 years coming out of this whole thing too. And so it kept me on that trajectory. So faith and, just this idea that I can be somebody and I can be a better version of myself all happened around the age of 30. And that's when life really began to shift for me in a very positive way. Now the gut punches were still coming, but it was getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that where you say the turning point came when suddenly you got in with this group of people who started to have an impact on your thinking, get you looking at yourself, and you started to sort of, I guess, get an insight that there are other ways that you can live your life, right, and be more productive, not just to yourself but to everyone around you. But then you talked about when you were in your early 20s, then moving into the automotive industry. Great. Clint gets a sales job, doesn't continue with education. That's fine. I did the same thing. I quit university and decided to go get a sales job. But then none of the people that I worked in selling with were meth heads. So,
right.
So, unfortunately, you had that. But it kind of proves something someone said to me recently, which is you are the average of the people that you spend the most time with.
Without question.
And you just, confirmed that in one of the best ways that I've ever heard. So when did divorce happen? Because then that, I guess, would have been the next, that kind of almost then starts the next chapter of what happens to Clint.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when I got involved with this company, we were still married. And then when again, I'm a man of faith. And so there came a point in time, I wasn't a church kid. And so the group that I worked with just happened to be a bunch of Christians. And so my upline, which people that have been in, MLMs are familiar with, highly successful, made a ton of money very quickly, cover of Success magazine kind of stuff, right? She had a big influence on me. And that was one thing she did. She went to church. I mean, that's how I saw it, right? And so she would constantly ask me to go. And my wife, she was never interested in that kind of thing. And frankly, I was not either, Roberto. I really, the reason why I went the day that I finally went, and for me, ended up deciding to give my life to God, I literally went because I thought, okay, this is one pocket of their life that's different than mine. And I've got to figure out, I was really trying to figure out why they had gut punches too, because I'd been with them now for several years by the time this happened.
Yeah.
but they always seem to respond a little differently. They always seem to have a measure of peace. They always seem to have this ongoing hope no matter what was hitting them. And for me, it wasn't like that at all. When challenges hit, it was like the end of the world and the sky is falling, and all that kind of stuff. So I went solely to see, okay, here's something else they do. And I really felt like I had a real tangible encounter with God. And so I gave my life to God. So the reason why that plays into my divorce is by the end of our 5th year, I really felt like I was being called or led into, however you want to describe it, into being in Christian ministry of some kind. And my ex-wife just really wanted nothing to do with that. And so the irony was we really had what at the time I thought was one of our best few months as far as just getting along. And then it was 2 days before Christmas, December 23rd. She comes into the house and drops these papers. She goes, "Oh, by the way, I've been meeting with a paralegal and, I want out." And it was a very interesting transaction, Roberto, because as I already described earlier, we had a very dysfunctional relationship. Our communication styles was like, there's gas and fire. I think it was more like rocket fuel and, whatever. It was just,
Yeah.
we could explode. And I remember being so angry when she set the papers down. I think just that idea of rejection and someone doesn't want you anymore. And then literally after a few minutes, and I'm not exaggerating at all, after a few minutes, this calm came over me. I was kind of like, why are you so angry? Because we were a train wreck together. We just were not good for each other, and it was the weirdest thing. I ended up saying, okay. And we sat there and we literally talked for probably 3 hours calmly, which I don't even know dating if we even did that, but it was just this thing where it's like, we need to go separate ways, So it was pretty amicable. And so shortly after that, we divorced. And so what that ended up doing is I felt like it opened up possibilities now in terms of, I really felt like I needed to move. I really felt like I wanted to be somewhere else. And by that time, I should mention, I wasn't living in LA anymore. I actually had lived for over a decade in a smaller town in Northern California, very small, called Redding, California. So just kind of, for me, I prayed and like, where should I go next? And in Dallas ended up being the clear, this is where I'm supposed to go. And I had never been here. I sold all of my possessions, literally, except for some things in my suitcase and a few things that I would need for a bedroom, and moved across country with a married couple friend of mine who were coming here as well to establish business and do some new things. So we committed to live together for 1 year. And then we would, obviously I would move out and get out of their marriage and move on. And so I came here, and that's when things really began to shift. And I began to get a clear picture of what I really wanted to do, which again, at that time was ministry. Didn't know it was necessarily going to be a pastor, but I knew I had a gift to talk to people. I knew I had a gift to move people and, move the needle in their life, help them see things they couldn't see and stuff like that. So, but it would be a couple years before I met my bride now. And we just celebrated 20 years yesterday.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wow.
So it was quite a journey. No, I was just going to say it was quite a journey coming out of that. And I'll point out, before we met, that was almost a 2-year span before, or a little over a 2-year span before we got married. And I spent that 2 years literally soaking up everything I possibly could to become a better human being, a better man, an actual husband who could be proud of, how he interacted with his bride. I studied all kinds of different things, and eventually how to be a dad. I really felt like I was going to get a chance to be a dad. We didn't have, my ex-wife, we didn't have children. And so I just studied how to be a better human being.
Yeah. So, I imagine at this stage you've kind of feel like you're getting it all together, and you can leave that chapter behind. You and Amaryllis. Have I pronounced that right?
That's pretty dang good. There's an English and a Spanish way. She's Puerto Rican. So Amaryllis is for us gringos, and then Amaryllis is a little bit better how you would.
Marelies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still can't after 20 years, I still can't roll my R's.
Yeah. um, so so then obviously I don't know if it was family planning or what, but then it's like the whole next tidal wave of Mierda basically just hits you. Um, you know, miscarriage, your sons, Gabriel and Liam, born prematurely. And then obviously, you know, kind of, well, you had a close call with Joel as well.
Yeah, that's right. With Amaryllis,
yeah. And then, you know, losing a child. The reason I said, you know, lost two children because, you know, we don't have children, Carolina and I, and you know, we've been through miscarriage and so on, and you know, that's as good as losing a child basically, because at the end of the day, you've brought a life into the world.
That's right.
And I can't even begin to imagine how you get through all of that to sitting in front of me today, this guy who is still, you know, we go back to when you were a teenager, you always, despite everything that was happening to you, you had this innate desire to help people. And you do that with an open heart. I imagine your faith has definitely been a part of helping you with that process, but like, how on earth do you pick yourself up time and time again after all of that, especially when you lose a teenage son? Because for most of us, I think for all of us, that is not the natural order of things.
No, it's not, you know, and I think I'm always very sensitive when I start answering this question too, because, you know, we're not the only ones on the planet Earth who have lost someone. And I want to say I'm very sorry for your loss too. You know, miscarriage is really a hard thing. It's a really hard thing. And, you know, I don't know if this was your experience, but I remember when we had the miscarriage, it was actually after Gabriel, before Joel. And it's just something most people don't talk about a whole lot. You know, it's not something you lead out with in a conversation, but it was amazing to me to find out how many people have suffered through that very thing. It's such a big number. And, you know, so, you know, I always want to be sensitive to what other people have experienced as well. So I'm going to frame it before I give you my story by just simply saying this. You know, I'm not anybody who's superhuman. There's nothing, in my opinion, that's spectacular or unique about me. But I think just throughout the journey, I've always tried to, okay, this is what happened. And I'll give some real tools by the time we're done here, but this is what happened. All right. What do I got to do now? You know, what do I got to do next? And so some of those things, those bumps and bruises and things that happened early on in my life, that's kind of how I saw it. Now, that said, you also have to weave in the reality that I didn't really recognize until my 30s that I had those really bad coping mechanisms. I didn't see drinking and partying until I was 30 plus years old as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I just thought I just like to have fun, you know. But then I began to realize that no, I also use it to mask pain, to push stuff down. And that's what I'd done. So, you know, starting to come out of that before we got married, I think was really huge. And that's just part of our story. And then, you know, there was something about our marriage too that obviously plays into this. We were friends before we ended up together. And Roberta, we could do an entire episode just on the pre-engagement, the story behind Gabriel. There's a lot to it, but I won't even tease you with that, or we're going to end up in the weeds of another story. But ultimately, you know, we went through some stuff just to even get to the point where we ended up getting married. And so we had really strong communication skills, and this deep friendship and respect for each other that was a really solid foundation, not knowing the bumps and bruises that were about to come, right? So when we had the miscarriage, you know, we got through it together. You know, we made a pact together, and we talked through it, and we cried together, and, you know, we expressed things. Neither one of us allowed each other to bury things in that particular thing, which I think, as you're going to see, those foundational approaches build and prepare you for things you would never wish for, but sometimes come. And so, ultimately, as you mentioned, we had some other, things that were tough. The boys being born prematurely was definitely one of those things. Liam was 1 pound, 14 ounces. He was born
I know.
3 months early,
Yeah.
And that was very scary because it was also, everybody's going to be able to relate to this because of COVID. When we had him, it was during the H1N1 virus. Now, the world hadn't flipped upside down like happened with COVID, but Amaryllis and I were the only two people that could even see him for the 3 months that he was in the hospital. So none of the extended family, grandparents, our boys, we had Joel and Gabriel were probably 3 and 5-ish at that time. So, they'd sit in a hospital room, waiting room for hours sometimes while we went in to visit Liam. So it was a really tough time. And we had to do that as a family. And the boys had to learn to kind of work with us. And even at a very young age, boys, I know this sucks. We know you want to see him. We know you don't want us to hang out here, but this is what we're dealing with right now. And we're going to have a good attitude. And, so we worked those things out as a family. And so eventually, once we get to Gabriel's story, we had some, how do I want to say it? I'm trying to characterize it for your audience. We just had some experiences that we had worked through together, that we had, loved each other and encouraged each other and talked to each other openly about as a family, that we really didn't have to start that foundation when the tragedy happened. That part was already there.
Yeah.
And I do think that was a factor. Nothing would prepare us for the pain of losing Gabriel. And anybody out there who has experienced this knows, and you said very well, it's a very unnatural thing. It goes against the order. It goes against everything you've ever dreamed or thought of that your life would be, but I do think, just our pattern of living did set us up to some degree to be able to walk this thing out in, if I could say it, in a healthy way. Not perfect, but at least healthy.
No, but you both had built a strong, wide foundation of emotional support by being a couple that talk to each other all the time. God knows, and I'll openly say this, it's something that we've never been great at. I think partly that's because of trauma that we've both been through in our lives before we came together. And coming into a relationship where both of you have had to build up so much mental toughness so that you could deal with things, and you become so self-reliant when you suddenly have someone else in your life that you love with all your heart, but it's so difficult to undo a few decades worth of building walls. So when adversity does strike, you're not as well prepared for it as you and Amaryllis were, because because you're just not used to communicating on a regular basis in that way. So I'm definitely learning relationship lessons from you right now. And it's something that basically it's something that I definitely need to work on. So when did I want to mention, I'm not going to mention him by name, but one of my good friends and clients, they lost their daughter. I think she was barely 5 years old.
Yeah.
Just recently. I think it's probably been about 6 or 7 months now, but it's been hard to watch them go through that, because this is not the first child they've lost either. young family. I remember going to the memorial, and seeing him, as they kind of filed people out of the church. And I mean, he held it really, really good. Well, when he was giving the eulogy,
Yeah.
I don't even know how he stood up there and held it together so well. But as everybody was being ushered out of the church to then go to where the wake was being held, I think you call it. I saw him at the back of the church with his son, and I just broke off from the crowd, and I just, it was a very big church, but just went towards him, and all I could say was his name, and I just reached out my arms, and we just, like, I just held him. He's
Yeah.
also a lot bigger than me. He's like 6'5", and I'm in 6 foot. um, and then he just let go, and I I know that it's only a few months later, but they're still struggling. I don't know how they're ever going to get out of that spiral.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess for people around, all you can do is just make sure that they know that they're loved and that you're available for them however you need them to be. There's no point trying to, because people are very quick when you suffer loss, people around you, your friends and so on, that haven't experienced it and have got no idea what to say to you, they inevitably end up saying the wrong thing. And it's not ill-intentioned. It's just
I
because
agree.
that's what we do as humans. We just feel like we need to spurt something out all the time to try and make people feel better. When sometimes all you need is just someone to kind of just say, listen, whatever it is you're going through, I'm here for you, however you need me. And that's it.
Yeah. No, that is so dead on. I'm glad we're talking about this, and gosh, there's layers to it, right? There's different things we can talk about regarding that, but and let's start with, your position. I had learned this in my years of pastoring, of helping so many people through really tough times. And, I've been in hospital rooms as a loved one passed away, and, the family response to that, and then trying to help them through it. So I had, again, some foreknowledge, if you will, of what that can look like. But at the end of the day, what I felt like I learned during that season of my life, and then it definitely became vividly true when we suffered our loss, is especially in the early stages. And I call, honestly, the first year the shock and awe phase. Now, if it's a tragedy, if it's unexpected, those first days, weeks, they're almost a blur. That's how much of a shock and awe they are. But it really continues throughout that first year, because one of the things that's just the stark reality of losing someone, and knowing that, depending on your belief system, for me, I believe we will be reunited, but it's going to be a long minute before that happens. And so, you just, you're scrapping, you're trying to do anything you can, even just to breathe. And then you've got, in that first year, birthdays, and that person is not there to celebrate, or it's their birthday. Then you've got holidays, depending on which holidays you celebrate, and that person's not there. That first year is a series of unwanted firsts. And so what you just said a second ago, to me, and then I wrote it in the book, actually, that's it. I love you. If I can do anything for you, let me know. Or if I can, whatever, your words. That's it. Because to your point, there are people out there who have never had the experience, and our human nature is to want to help. So I'm right there with you. I don't think any people do it out of a mean spirit. I think they sincerely want to say something that's helpful. But I'll even take it a step further. Even people that have been through it, like I've been through it. Now, less than a month ago, 3 weeks ago, during our time as pastors, we were also youth pastors. And one of our youth, who's no longer a youth, she's a 30-year-old woman now, their 1-year-old just turned 1 year old. I think he was technically 13 months old, just died in his sleep, just gone, and they reached out to us because obviously they knew our story. But even us having our story, we don't approach that with, yeah, I totally get it. And let me tell you, here's what we experience. No, it was, we love you. What can we do? What
Mm.
can we do? And my wife actually ended up flying. That was when we lived in Seattle. We were in Seattle for 7 years. She flew up there, and her intention originally, she had been asked to actually do the ceremony, but honestly, that's too much. She didn't want to be a distraction, and she was just frankly, a little bit um, concerned that if she did get up there to try and speak and looking at Ariana's her name and what they were suffering through, that she would lose it, and she didn't want that to be their experience. So instead, she just flew up there and she literally just sat with her and hugged her and was with her whenever she needed it. And so that's it, man. It really is. It's just, I love you, and if I can serve you in any way, let me know. I'll add this to it before we move on to the person who's going through it. Another thing is when it's someone that you really love, there's a strange phenomenon that happens after you suffer such a tragic loss. And that is, even people that you felt were really close to you and were there maybe in the first week or two, literally just disappear off the face of the planet. Like you never hear from them again.
Oh yeah.
And it's a really weird thing. And, I think much like the thought that, they want to say something to be helpful, but they don't know what to say, then it switches. And now they just don't check up on you at all. And of course, that's a two-way street. I mean, we needed to be able to reach out to certain people at different times, and that was on us. But the truth is, a lot of people just kind of fall off the face of the planet. And I think the reason is because they're so fearful of triggering you, or it's such a difficult concept, right? Of losing a child, and they have children, most likely, that they just can't even go there on any level themselves. And so they just check out. And so the second piece, I think, for someone who has a friend who's going through it is just make sure, man, make sure every once, it doesn't have to be every day, maybe it's once a month, but just check in, just see, hey man, just want to check up. How are things going? How are you doing? You don't even need to ask about, the situation, because the
No, it
truth
can
is,
even be
yeah,
something as simple as, "Hey, I just wanted you to know I was thinking about you."
absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly
We
right.
it's so true what you said, because we had, I don't want to turn this into a therapy session for me, but um for everybody listening as well. But we had so many friends that dropped off the face of the planet when we went through our loss, because um they knew how much we wanted to start a family, and we loved their kids. Um but people kind of went funny right after we shared the news with them.
Yeah.
And some of these people I'd known for like 20 years or more. And there was a big birthday for the kids of one particular very close friend of mine. And we found out via the wonders of social media that they'd had this big party, and we weren't invited.
Yeah.
So I called and I said, "Hey, hope you guys had a great time. Just wondering why we weren't invited, and is it anything to do with what happened to us recently?" And they're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, there were going to be a lot of screaming 5-year-olds there, and we just figured that you guys wouldn't want to be around children." And I was like, "We love your kids like they're our nephews and nieces. Why would we not want to be around? You should have just asked us." And we realized that because obviously everybody else that was there, same group of friends, that they'd all been saying the same thing. And so whole group of friends just disappears off the face of the planet, because you've gone from being, people feeling sorry for you because that thing happened to you, but now you're sort of tarnished with this brush of that thing happened to them. So they're the kind of childless
Yeah.
couple that don't want to be around kids. It's just like,
Right.
you effing nuts or something.
Right. Right.
But then that hurts as well. And that
Yes.
and I don't like to think the worst of people. I think, again, we're human, no one's perfect. And then obviously the tide of time just carries on. for everybody.
Right.
And it just means that the currents shift you all in different directions, and then new people come into your life and you kind of just move on with it, right?
Yeah. Man, I tell you. And the sad thing is, especially, since I put myself out there and I've started doing what I'm doing now and doing a lot of these interviews and stuff like that, your story, my story, it's so common. It's so common. And we'll probably get into it later, but it just boils down to so many people are uncomfortable with having what I like to call courageous conversations, because really
Yeah.
what you would have liked in that situation and what we've always appreciated because we have, and I'm sure you have too, we've had some beautiful people that have been in it with us too, that are just willing to ask, hey, I just want to ask you, like this party, how do you feel about, we'd love to have you, but just, wanted to be sensitive to what you're going through. How do you feel about it? As
Yeah.
opposed to an assumption of no. And here's what I believe. I believe that speaks more to their own discomfort. And again, these aren't wicked, evil people.
No.
It's just, it speaks to a piece of them that they're not comfortable with. So their discomfort is easily explained away by, well, you would probably feel discomfort, and
Yeah.
so we just don't have this courageous conversation,
Exactly.
um
But see,
gosh.
this leads perfectly into, so now, okay, let's take it away from our woes. Just completely deflated everybody. Everyone's like, we came here because we are going to learn how to eat fear for breakfast. We're getting to that,
We
people.
still are.
We
We're
are
working
getting to it. But that's the thing, right? Is this whole thing about courage.
right.
This whole thing about courage. And what you were saying there about people having their own hang-ups and stuff, and really it's all about people making assumptions. So when you come to other areas of our life, whether it's you're single and there's that girl or guy that you really like, that you get on the same train with at the same time every single morning, and months go by, and you just never pluck up the courage to talk to them, but you really want to, and you never do.
Yeah.
I'm obviously talking from personal experience here.
Yeah, you and me both.
I did eventually pluck up the courage, but that's not who I'm married to. That was a whole other story for another time. And or you're in sales. We've both been in sales. We know what this one's like. Um, you need to pick up that phone and you need to introduce yourself to a potential prospect, and you freeze and you
Yeah.
just go and do busy work just to avoid picking up the phone because you're scared. What are you scared of? You're scared of rejection. You're scared they're going to say no. They're going to tell you to F off or whatever.
Right.
Some of the other things that we've kind of talked around, how do people, um, there's not a really kind of quick and easy answer to that, is there? Because I know that there are people out there that will say, you've got to be in tune with your goals, right? You've got to write things down and know where you're going, and that's what helps you overcome stuff. At the end of the day, we're all human. We're all kind of scared of stuff. We all go into protection mode. It's like something from our prehistoric days where, we have to stay small in order to not be seen by the lions or bears or tigers. I was going to say dinosaurs, but we didn't coexist at the same time, I don't think. And I get confused with movies, Jurassic Park and stuff.
Yeah.
But you need to stay small in order to survive. But the weird thing is that sometimes staying small in what you do in order to survive is actually not going to help you to survive. It's going to kill you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do we deal with all of this stuff, Clint? How do we eat fear? How do we become courageous?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting for me on my journey, and I'm going to repeat that this thing is a journey, right? So I just want to encourage anybody right now that's out there that has struggled in any area of their life. You talked about marital communication, stuff like that, going through a hard loss. I don't care if you've not done it well for 20 years, you can turn that around and you can start turning that ship today. So first of all, there is always hope. And one of the things I've done is I've always been very interested. I'm kind of a geek when it comes to neuroscience and things like that. And one of the things that has really the last 20 years in particular, neuroscience has just grown by leaps and bounds in terms of discoveries about the way our brain was created, and specifically the relationship between our brain and our emotions and how we function. And so what scientists now know, we always used to hear, I don't know if, I know you grew up and have lived in London your whole life, but I think it's a global thing. We used to always say, well, I've heard you only use 8% of your brain, or 7% of your brain. And what we're finding out now is no, you actually use 100% of your brain. Now, you may not use it well, but it's functioning all the time. But what's interesting and also empowering, once you know it, is that they now know that 95% of our brain is like a background program in your computer. It's subconscious. Only 5% of what we do is conscious. And your brain is constantly looking to make the easiest decision possible. Well, let's just say it up front. Choosing courage is typically not the easiest decision. So what ends up happening is, and you had mentioned, goals, and we have so many teachings out there, or courses or whatever, about writing out goals and do ABC and then you'll get this. And that's very helpful. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very helpful for accomplishment. It doesn't help you at all in becoming the best version of yourself. It doesn't help you at all at overcoming the gut punches of life. It doesn't help you at all in having an elite marriage. It doesn't help you at all of being, the kind of friend that everybody absolutely wants to be their first phone call when adversity hits, right? Because those things only help you accomplish. Whereas when you become self-aware and you're willing to dig into the way you tick, you can begin to change some things, And so that's why I really feel like, leading into even the morning of the tragedy, I had some courageous decisions that needed to be made. And so the very first one was, how in the hell do you tell a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old that their big brother, who is bigger than life, and that wasn't just true in our family, he was that kind of a magnetic force with everybody that he was involved in. For listeners that don't know, he actually became a pilot at 17 years old. He got his license. He, was very well known in his group with aviation. He had friends across the board. He was someone who, taught himself photography, and he was amazing at that, all this stuff. How do you have that conversation with them that he's gone now? That requires courage. And so in that moment, in that morning when they came out, because it was a hellish night, Roberto, we don't need to get into all that, but I'll just say it this way. We knew at 8:30 p.m. the night before that he had disappeared off the radar. There was a bunch of misinformation, confusion throughout the night. We thought he was gone, then maybe he wasn't. And it was all over the map until 3:30 a.m. And that's when we actually heard that the coroner had said he's gone, So what do you do? And I just remember, and this is, I think, key for a lot of us when we suffer tragedy, especially if you're a father and have children, is as much as you're in pain, because I was in searing pain, you do recognize you have a responsibility. And so I knew I needed to do something, to set a compass. And so here's what happened. And this is something I think that at the end of the day is very practical, but it's also profound. And if you've suffered a loss and you haven't done what I'm talking about yet, it's okay. You can change this at any point in time. And that is, I looked at them and I said, boys, we have two choices. We always have two choices.
Yeah.
Always. I don't care what it is. Coming to your shop. Well, I probably have 100 choices if I came to your shop, but at the end of the day, maybe it's the blue suit, maybe it's the gray suit, whatever. We all have choices, right? And so I said, here's our choices. We could choose to identify with his death for the rest of our lives, because I've seen it. I've watched people go through it where their entire lives are marked by this death. And so their focal point, that's important. Their focal point is always around the tragedy of it and the loss, and I'm never going to see him again. And, and in our case, he was flying and that was his dream, but now he lost and he died because he was trying to chase his dream, all these things. And that will mark you, and it will come out in other areas of your life for the rest of your life if you don't deal with that and you focus on the pain of it. And so I told them, I didn't use all those words obviously with them, but that was the point, is we're not going to get stuck in the tragedy of this. What we're going to do is we're going to choose life. And for us, what that meant was, I just gave you a very quick rapid fire of Gabriel's life and personality. He lived life to the fullest. The truth is, as much as I would have him back in an instant, and wanted our story to be very different, in just under 18 years, he lived more and was living his dream and chased new experiences more than a lot of people will live their entire life. He really did. And so I told him, I said, we're not going to do necessarily things he did. None of us want to be a pilot, not because of the crash, just that's not our passion, but we're going to choose to live the way he lived. And that's how we're going to walk this out. And the second piece of that was the grieving side. And I've already kind of laid a foundation of, just how we've been. And that was just simply, we don't know what this is going to look like. Grieving is not a step-by-step thing. Even when you read psychologists who talk about the 8 phases or steps of grieving, the gentleman who actually, and I can't think of the doctor's name, who actually came out with that whole idea, I'm drawing a total blank on his name, but even he said, so many people have treated it like step 1, step 2, you're going to go through this and then this and then this and then this. And that was never even his intention, because that's not the way it works. It's fluid. You never know when emotion is going to hit. You never know when the trigger is going to hit. And so I just told them, listen, we're going to do this together. And so if I need to cry, I'm going to cry, and I'm going to cry in front of you. I'm not going to go hide and pretend and then come out with my eyes all wiped and putting drops in my eyes so they're nice and clear and they're not red. We're not going to do that. We're not going to hide from pain. We're going to express it together. If you're angry, and we don't cuss as a habit here, we cuss sometimes, but we don't cuss as a habit. But I even told the boys at that age, I'm like, if you need to cuss because you're angry about what happened, you need to know there's no punishment for that. It's okay. But we're going to talk it through. And so that's what we have done and are still doing, Roberto. It didn't stop. It's been a little over 3.5 years. That's nothing. 2 months is nothing. 3 years is nothing. I've done a lot of these interviews. I've talked to people. 20 years is nothing when you're talking about that kind of a loss.
Yeah.
But there is something very healing. And I don't mean like this destination. I mean, in the process of healing as time goes on, that being very honest about your emotions and talking things through, in our case, as a family unit, keep you moving forward. And that's really what it's all been about for us. It's not about, the pain. I've always said the pain is always going to be there. People don't like that. That's not the answer we want, right? But you have to think about it. The reason why the pain is there is because of the great love we shared for our son. Just that simple. So our goal isn't even, how do I get rid of the pain? I'm not trying to get rid of pain, but I am telling it how to behave. I am telling it where to go.
Yeah.
And that's partly what launched me out eventually to write the book and things like that. But I think, when you start talking about eating fear for breakfast and having courage, I was asked, this is a tough question for people because we've already kind of, beat into the ground the whole concept that people kind of disappear or they aren't willing to have, courageous conversations and ask you stuff. But some will. And I remember some asking me, weren't you afraid that this could happen? Right? When he started flying. That's a very valid question. And so here's the truth. It takes courage to live life. It takes courage to live dreams. And so when Gabriel first started, he was 16 years old, and obviously he had been flying with an instructor for a while before this happened. But at 16, he flew solo before he even had a driver's license, because here in the States, that's how old you have to be to get a driver's license. Was there fear involved there? Absolutely. I have no doubt that when his flight instructor got out of the plane, and we did have some conversations about this, but when he got out of the plane and said, okay, go for it, there was some fear involved there. But eating fear for breakfast, the reason why I say that and the reason why I love that phrase is because fear comes daily. I know intermittent fasting, not everybody eats daily, but you get the point, right? Breakfast every day. Fear comes every day, and you have a choice on whether or not you eat it and tell it where to go, or you allow it to dictate to you what you're going to do. So he could have gotten out of the plane, but he had never accomplished his dream. And his first dream was, I want to be a licensed pilot at 17 years old. That was a goal. So when he goes up, he's taking off. We were there, and he's getting into the sky. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's like, I don't know what you're into over there. I don't know if it's football or, for me here, baseball and American football. It was that kind of thing where there's this like exhilarating excitement, and he gets up and he starts circling. I'm like, this is amazing. And then the thought occurs to you, oh, crap, he's got to land that thing, And that's when fear, right? So now for me, fear began to kick in. And so for me, I felt like in those moments, I had two choices. I could let that fear begin to overwhelm me to the point where maybe as a parent, I end up telling him, hey, you know what? This is just too much. Can't do it. I'm sorry. I know it was his dream since he was 8 years old, Roberto. Like, it happened when he was 8. He went up with his Uncle Danny in a small plane and he got the bug and he never let go of it. So for us to allow fear in our case to dictate what we would allow him to pursue, literally his dreams were hanging in the balance. And so we just had to choose courage. Okay, let's do it. Let's go for it. And we went for it as a family. And so that's just one example, but fear is going to come to you. There's no question about it. And part of that 95% that we were talking about a minute ago, that neuroscience is proving is the program running in the back of your mind. It involves that freeze, flight, fight mentality. And the reality of it is, we don't typically have life or death situations, there are certain professions that may, but most of us don't face that reality, but our brains don't know the difference. And so if you don't begin to take a look at your life and ask yourself hard questions, or bring in a coach or somebody that can ask you questions that reveal, why do I think the way I do? Why do I respond that way? Why don't I have better communication skills with my friends or my marriage? Okay, these are some of my fears. These are some of the things that, have held me back in the past. Now that I know what they are, what can I do to actually change those? And that's one of my passions, is helping people see that. And you read from my profile earlier about bringing clarity. Here's the most awesome thing. And then I want to get your thoughts on this too. Here's the most awesome thing about this, in my opinion. When I'm coaching someone, especially if it's one-on-one, I never tell people what to do. I don't tell them how to be courageous. I don't tell them what decisions need to be made. You know why? Because they're already in there. They're already in there. But we've automated so many behaviors that sometimes we just don't recognize why we're stuck. And just asking questions tend to draw that out. And what ends up happening is, and I've had some clients with some amazing testimonies, turnarounds, stories. It happened with them getting these questions asked of them and them coming out with the answers. And then once the answers are right in front of them, and I like to put stuff on paper so you can see it, then we begin to say, okay, what can you do to change it? What decisions do you think you need to make? And guess what? It's already in there. With rare exception, most people already have the answers. They already know what courageous decisions need to be made. They've just been trapped in that constant loop that they've been stuck in. And once that happens and they own that, radical changes can happen. I mean, like today. And that's whether it's, overcoming pain or dysfunction, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. I am one of my old bosses years and years ago taught me something that basically encapsulates everything that you've spoken about. Because if we go back to, let me ask you this before I tell you what he said. When your son was going up in the plane and you guys were standing there watching him go up and then realizing he's got to come back down at some point, and you're obviously struggling with all the emotions you're feeling, and then as you quite rightly said, that pretty much anything in life you're faced with a choice to do, number one or number two. And your kind of thoughts are racing through your mind, and as parents, you're thinking, do you know what? We can't let him do this anymore.
Right.
Or we do let him do this anyway, and we put all of our hang-ups aside so that he can do this. Which of those two would have been the easiest way out for you? Which would have been the easiest choice?
Oh, shutting him down. Listen,
yeah,
this is too scary. You're too young. You're too this. You're too that. We're not ready for this. I mean, there's so many excuses we can make, right, to justify quitting. But yeah, exactly. It would have been much easier to make the not courageous decision and allow fear to dictate. But I'm so glad you framed that question, because here's the reality. This is how I see it. We made the courageous decision we did because it was based on love, not fear. We don't need to get deeply into that, but I really believe that there's a hierarchy of emotion, and the greatest, most positive force on the planet is love, and there's a whole bunch of subsets of how that is expressed, right? And then on the opposite side, because there's the law of polarity, there's always two choices, and there's always an opposite of something, and the opposite of love is fear. And so for us, the reason why we made the decision to choose courage and just let him chase his dream, and he achieved it. Obviously there was way more in our dreams and his dreams, and he had other goals that went beyond that. So I'm not diminishing it down to, well, he accomplished everything we ever dreamed of. No, not even close. We had a lot of dreams for him, but love allowed him to chase what was right in front of him, and he accomplished it. Fear would have crippled it. And who knows, maybe we would have had him until he was 21, 25, 50. I don't know. We'll never know that part, right? But had we crushed his dreams, if that's what we would have taught him, is no, fear needs to rule, then we may have taught him a lesson to where he would have ended up being a complete shadow of himself. And I refuse to be a revisionist about this story. Even though it ended in tragedy, I refuse to be a revisionist and go back, well, maybe fear was, keeping you from suffering this. No, love prevailed, and he chased his dream. And it just so happens that our story is 3 months shy of his 18th birthday, while he was in a plane living his dream, his life came to an end.
Fear likes the easy option. So as your brain is running through its background processes, it's always saying, if this, then do that, whatever, this might happen. So the lesson that I was taught a long time ago was, whenever you're faced with a choice in life, the hardest choice of the two is always the right one.
Yeah, that's probably true, man. Yeah.
But it is. You think about everything that you've shared with us today, right? Easiest choice as a parent, shut your kid down. You can't do that.
Yep.
Right? Because we don't want to go through all the stuff that we're feeling. So you can't do what you want to do. Hard choice. We let him do what he wants to do. Let him go after his dreams, even though we're petrified.
Yeah, that's right.
But we need to let him live. And that turned out to be the right decision.
Absolutely. I wouldn't change it. And let me share this with you.
The spirit of how he lived his life. And then after you lose him, you sit down with your other children and you say you're going to embrace life. That's the hardest thing of the two. Most people would just go crawl into a corner and die, or worse.
Right.
Or worse. Because that's the easiest thing to do. But you honored his legacy. You gave him a legacy by embracing life.
That's right.
And then you move that. This is obviously the mother of all examples, and God knows you and I both hope nobody else has to experience this, but unfortunately people will. But then you just go down to some of the other trivial stuff that we have to deal with in our lives every single day. All those little decisions that we have to make, you know, do I eat a bar of chocolate or do I just grab a handful of nuts? Right? Do I drink a couple beers or do I just stay on soft drinks because I got to go cycle train in the morning? Again, I'm talking from personal experience.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's always hardest the hardest choice to make out of the two things is usually the right one.
Yeah.
It's usually the one that's going to set you on the right path and stop you hurtling into oblivion. You know, what if I do pick up that phone and make that one last sales call every single day? And you never know what's at the end of that rainbow.
Yeah. No, to your point, man, you just said, I mean, what you just said really is so profound because it is the easier decision in the moment, but it ends up having the most devastating results. That's the thing about it, is when we allow fear to dictate, it may make making that decision easy in the moment, but the lifelong results are devastating. And I would say that even though we just made a pretty strong case that, you know, choosing fear is the easier decision, I think at the end of the day, when you look at your journey in life, if that's your pattern, you now have ensured the hardest result. And one of the things that I said in the book was, don't fear that you will die, fear that you will quit living before you do. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about when you choose the easy decisions of life based on fear, you're choosing to kill the potential, the opportunity for something that could be life-changing. You know, you said what if, and I use that all the time. I love that because when people, like, for example, public speaking, right? Public speaking for most people is always considered to be one of the top things people fear. There's other things on the list, but public speaking is definitely up there. Why is that? Because we fear embarrassment. We fear that we're not going to say things right way or whatever. So there's this what if, right? What if I fail? What if I don't do well? What if I try to have this conversation with my bride and she explodes in my face? What if I allow my child to go do this and they get hurt? What, all these what ifs, right? Well, there's an opposite side to that. We're back on that law of polarity. There's an opposite side of that. What if? What if I'm wildly successful? I went through this, with the idea of writing a book. What if I fail? What if no one wants to buy it? What if no one cares? What if I come off stupid? All those things. What if what you choose to do, that courageous decision, transforms your life and other people around you? And it's a simple switch of a flip of a switch, but it takes intention to do it. It doesn't happen on autopilot. Autopilot causes you to make the easy, fearful decision, right? So I just think that's something that we need to constantly be mindful of and recognize that, it's the courageous decisions in life. Like you said, it's those harder decisions typically that carry with them, I would say, not even just the potential, but also the hope for something amazing. And you get to choose.
I couldn't think of a better place to end this, although I think we will hopefully do it again in future. But as profound as you think I am, you're like 2 million times more profound. When my wife eventually listens to this, because she's about 50 episodes behind, she'll laugh when you when she hears you telling me that I said something profound. Anyway, so if listeners want to connect with you, so obviously you have your website, which is www.bigboldbrave.us/book-Clint, and I'm going to put all of your links in the show notes. Where else can people connect with you, Clint?
That's the best spot. It really is. Because if you go to my website, all of my social media links are there. If you want to follow me on any social platform, obviously you're in the UK, but your audience is all over the place. So My website is the perfect place to go to learn more about what I'm doing, to potentially connect with me and for us to do some stuff together. But if you want the book, it's probably just much easier to go to Amazon, wherever you happen to live, because it's available wherever books are sold. But BigBoldBrave.us is the best spot, because I've got some things that'll be coming down the road. Would love it if your listeners signed up for my weekly newsletter. And I have a promise to everybody, because I hate clutter. And so I'm not sending you, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I've signed up for some newsletters. And next thing I know, I'm getting like 3 emails a day. I don't do that. It's one a week. It's one a week. It's going out on Fridays. And it always includes some free coaching tips, some things that, I think you can implement and find helpful immediately. Just some things I love. And then it also includes updates of what's coming next. So that's the best way. And I appreciate you asking about that.
Oh, you're welcome. Clint, I always ask everybody this. Have you had fun today?
Oh, totally. Yeah, no. As long as we waited to do this, it did not disappoint. And I am hopeful that somewhere down the road, I know you've got a lot of people clamoring to be on your show, but I would love to do it again, and let's tackle something else. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Oh,
and if I make it back over there, by the way, because it's been years since I've been to London, but if I make it back over there, we are definitely hooking up, and you're going to make me look good. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for joining Clint and I on today's episode. Don't forget, we're on Instagram at Tailoring Talk Podcast. I love feedback, so email me at the usual place, tailoringtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. You can also click the share button in your player to send this episode on to people you know who will get some help or be inspired with what Clint shared today. If you're enjoying Tailoring Talk and want to support the show, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Roberto Rivilla. Have a great week. Be good to each other, and I'll see you on the next one.